So good morning to all of you here in India, and good evening to Judy ma'am also there. We most welcome to you here in our this session of Indigenous Heritage of Indigenous Arts of India. And as we know that you are doing a great work here, so we humbly welcome once again. And I request to Hanu sir, please introduce about madam for our all the scholars, and we'll start our session. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Bobre. Just to introduce Judy ma'am with you. Judy ma'am is a social entrepreneur who's been working in the field of textile artisans of Kutch. She's lived in Kutch for almost 30 years now, and during that time she's co-founded and operated Kala Raksha Trust, which is a cooperative for women embroiderers, and she has also established the Kala Raksha Textile Museum and founded the Kala Raksha Vidyalaya, which is the first design school for traditional artisans. For this concept and this work, Judy ma'am was awarded the Ashoka Fellowship for Social Entrepreneurship in 2003. So during her 8-year tenure as director of school Kala Raksha Vidyalaya, she received international recognition for its unique approach to education of artisans. Judy ma'am received the Sir Misha Black Medal for Distinguished Services to Design Education in 2009, the Crafts Council of India Kamla Award in 2010, the George B. Walters 36 Service to Society Award from Lawrence University in 2014, and the New Delhi Rotary Distinguished Service Award in 2020. In 2014, to expand the design education program to an institute, Frater ma'am joined the KJ Somaiya Gujarat Trust to begin Somaiya Kala Vidyalaya. From 2014 to 2020, as founder-director, she initiated a graduate business and management course, outreach to regions, co-design programs, and a course in craft traditions for non-artisans. She runs a blog called Threads of Identity, which is on embroidery and adornment of nomadic rabaris, which received the Costume Society of America Mila Davenport Award as well. Prior to her residence in India, she was Associate Curator of Eastern Hemisphere Collection at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. So with this, I'll hand over the session to Judy ma'am, and I'll request her to start her presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to have this opportunity, actually, because I had sort of drifted away from embroidery for a while, and it was a good opportunity to get back and bring it all together. Now, I'm going to start sharing my screen. I think you have to direct me one more time.
Yes, ma'am. Just you are already presenting, so just start your PPT and then we can see the presentation.
Like this?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Now you can just.
Cool. Wonderful.
Click on PPT only. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm also happy to have this opportunity now because it happens to be International Women's History Month. And we're just beginning that. And what I want to talk about today is how Rabari embroidery is really a women's history. And that's how I really got started working with embroidery. When I first came to India in 1970, and that's 50 years ago, I was intrigued by the embroidery because it seemed to be a way that, you know, like if you, as an anthropologist, if you ask people questions, they give you the answer they think you should hear, right? But the embroidery was them telling their own story in their own medium, right? So that's how I got interested in the expressive aspects of embroidery. And then I went on to, I did my 2 master's degrees in examining embroidery as a primary document of chronicling history. And so I will get started now. The Rabaris are a pastoral nomadic community spread over northwest India, primarily in Rajasthan and Gujarat. And they were originally camel herders. They also herd sheep, goats, and now cattle, cows, and buffalo, depending on what's appropriate to where they are. And in Kutch, where I stayed for the last 30 years, there are 3 Rabari subgroups, the Kutchis in the west, the Debrias in the central part of Kutch, and the Wagodees in the eastern part of Kutch. And of those, the Wagodees, and to some extent, not so much, the Debrias, still are semi-nomadic. Okay. Now, Rabari women have historically embroidered, and they embroider very creatively, embroider their garments and garments for other members of their family, bags to carry things because they're nomadic, household decorations, and camel trappings. Yeah, this is to beautify their lives. But embroidery also had an important function as a sort of what we would call social networking, I guess, an opportunity for women who, because it's a patrilineal society, women come to the in-laws' village, so they're all from different villages, and it's a chance for them to get together and have a sort of a support group. Embroidery is also decoration, of course, for festive occasions, and it's an important contribution to dowries as well as personal adornment. So traditionally embroidery was never made for sale. It did not have monetary value, but it had social value. Okay. And finally, embroidery was an important expression of a woman's capability and creativity. And what you're looking at here is the time of wedding in a bunga in Tundawand near Mundra, near Mandwi in Kutch. And when a woman, actually not when she was married, after she was married, when she had her first child, she would present her dowry. So she kept that dowry. She had a little extra time to work on it until that first son, not child, sorry, the first son was born. And then she would display it, present it to her own natal village, and then pack it up and take it to her in-laws' village and display it once again. Now, those displays were sort of like a jury, and women of the community of both villages would come and very seriously inspect that dowry. And what they were looking for is creativity. The worst thing that you could hear is someone saying she didn't do anything new, right? So this was an opportunity to show who she was, what her capacity was. And that was true even till the early 21st century. This is a dowry presentation I'm going to say, it's in the 2000s for sure, maybe 2010 or something like that. Okay. All Rabaris in Kutch share a distinctive style of embroidery, and it's created with a certain repertoire of stitches. We have the open or square chain stitch, interlacing, various interlacing stitches, buttonhole stitches, back and Romanian stitches, and lots of mirrors set onto the fabric. And I'm going to show you a close-up here so we can see better. I don't know, can I use my pointer here? I don't think, yes, I can. Can you see this pointer? Can anyone talk?
Yes, ma'am. We can see the pointer.
Okay, good. So this is the chain stitch. It's an open or square chain stitch, and you see it's used to outline all of the motifs. And then here is one type of interlacing. Here it is again. It is sometimes used to fill in areas. In this particular example, we're filling in with mirrors. And usually the way that a woman embroiders is to do the basic outlining. So you would have, and colors are also important. You would always think about contrast. So if your background is not black, you will use black. Otherwise, if it's black, you'll use red. Those are I like to think of it like music. So that's your bass, right, in music. Then you have your rhythm, and that is yellow and white. And you see it's always a rhythm of yellow, white, yellow, white here, going back and forth. So that's your rhythm. And then your melody is all the other colors. And they're usually used in a particular pattern as well. And again, you're thinking contrast. So here you see your pink and your blue. So that's cool and warm, although they didn't think of it that way, but that's how they understood color. So, okay, that's color, and here we have some more accent stitches of buttonhole stitching. The mirrors are also held in with a kind of buttonhole stitching. They are, they're sort of tacked on with a grid, and then because you can't stitch through the mirror, you stitch through that grid. Very ingenious way of applying mirrors to the fabric. And you also see that Rabaris used many different shapes of mirror. You have round mirrors, which are common, square, triangular, and diamond shaped. There are also teardrop shaped. There aren't any in this one. Okay, so those are, and here we have a detached chain stitch. Okay, so these are some of the stitches that Rabaris used to do their embroidery. However, it's important to understand that style is much more than technique, because you could very well say the same stitches are used in all of these embroideries as well. This is a Paco embroidery done by the Megwal community, and this is Rajput embroidery from Wagodee, and Ahir embroidery from Central Kutch, and all of them use the same stitch repertoire, but the styles are very different. So the styles also comprise color and motif and pattern. And so that particular combination of color, stitch, pattern, motif is what comprises a style of embroidery. So even scale and density of stitching can have an impact on the visual language of an embroidery. Okay, so this is a close-up of that same Paco embroidery done by Megwal embroiderers, and down here we have the Mutwa embroidery, very fine. Okay. So styles are cultural heritage, and the Rabari style conveys Rabaris to each other and to others. And the motifs that are a part of that style also depict the women's understanding of their life, their how they feel about their life, what's important to them in their lives. And it's sort of like a non-literate language of expression. Here we have an oshiko, a pillow, a ceremonial pillow, and it's usually used during a ceremony, and weddings are a very important ceremony. And so it's depicting a sort of a wedding scene. In the center, we have an elephant, which is, and it has, this is a very stylized rider, okay, but this is indicating the groom. This is the elephant with the rider is the groom. And here are women coming to greet him, bearing pots on their heads, as they do. And then we have symbols of happiness and celebration. We have peacocks here, and parrots here, and scorpions, which aren't really a happy symbol, but somehow they are a part of this whole repertoire of symbols. And I think that's all we have here. Now I'm going to show you another one. This is a kotoro, which is a dowry sack. And women made sacks of different sizes for carrying different things, but their dowry was carried in a series of sacks. And this is like a medium-sized one, okay? And in this, we see the groom on an elephant. Now it's very clear, okay? Here's the hati and the groom. And we know he's a groom because he has a sword. The groom will always, he's a king for the day and he's carrying that sword. And here's the peacock up here. A hularu is a child's ornament, actually, a silver ornament, a necklace. And a parrot over here, a very nice parrot. And the scorpion here. And even all of the motifs, even if they're geometric, even if they look just like patterns, have a name and a meaning. And down here we have tak baoliu, which tak is the mirror, and baoliu means acacia, the ganda baol that's so prevalent in Kutch. Okay. I also wanted to say that traditionally, these motifs were not drawn, certainly not printed. The women worked directly, needle to fabric. And, you know, I explain it to people like this. You don't draw before you draw, right? Drawing is our medium, pencil. You might draw before you paint. But the needle and thread are the Rabari embroiderer's medium. And so they go directly onto the fabric. Traditionally, they would do a basting stitch, maybe to sort of chalk out. And again, like I said, they begin with the outlining and then they fill in. Okay, Rabari embroidery style is not static. Neither is culture static, right? It's always evolving over time, and it evolved according to whatever was going on in women's lives at the time, right? So that's how it chronicles their history. As they moved from place to place, they came in contact with different cultures, they adjusted, but they always maintained their identity. So I think you can see in all of these, I started looking at this, you know, when I first came to India in 1970, and then I did a lot of research in universities and museums. And then, because I stayed in Kutch for 30 years, I had the wonderful opportunity to actually see how styles evolve, and they seem to evolve faster and faster as time goes on. But here we can see 3 different eras. The first one is around 1940, and you see the style is, well, okay, there's always going to be this motif, this pattern here of these, it's called jarmar, and jarmar is a necklace, really. So this is Kanchalino jarmar, and it's always up here also, right? Then you have the circles at the breasts and these bajuband on the side, which is actually, bajuband is an ornament worn on the upper arm. So embroidery is like ornamentation, right? You have your jarmar and your bajuband. And down here you have your border, and on the sides the border, and the fabric will be a contrasting color here. Okay, now here we still have the Kanchalinu jarmar at the top, but we've gotten rid of it down here. We still have the circles at the breast, but here we have 2, and actually this is very interesting. The hati has become, you know, hati is not there in Rabari life anymore. In fact, it probably never was. I mean, maybe they had seen royalty riding elephants, I'm not sure. But by this time, there's no hati anywhere in sight, and it becomes a kabart. It's the cupboard. That's what's relevant in their life at the time. They're keeping their valuables in cupboards, okay? And then when we come down here towards beginning, almost the end of the 20th century, right? It's getting more abstract. But here's a favorite motif down here, Shravan, the mythical I hope you all know about Shravan, who carried his aging parents on a pilgrimage, right? He's a symbol of a kind of an ideal son. And we have two Shravans here. And still we retain the circles at the breast. You're emphasizing the body. And this, I think, is Ambo, mango tree, but a very stylized one. Okay, but I think you can see that throughout, even though it's different, it's also Rabari. And I had a wonderful, I made a film on Rabari embroidery. And one of my favorite scenes is a woman who I give her a bunch of embroiders and I say, organize them chronologically. And she does it. And then she says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all different and all Rabari. And that's it. I mean, that's what we're talking about, how they keep their identity, even though it adapts to being contemporary. Okay. We can also see the same evolution over time in the Kotlo, the Dowry Sack. This one is one of my all-time favorites. It's a beauty, 1940. It combines some beautiful mushroom applique down here and bandani, and then in the center there are 5 gules, the big one, and the 4 in the corners, and some little trees here. But it's pretty much abstract. It's not very pictorial. Here in 1960, it gets a little more pictorial. You have your parrots here, and down here you have the parrot and circle border, which is very popular during that time and onward. And you'll notice that in all 3 of them, there's much less embroidery at the top. And certainly no mirrors, because the way that you use this sack is you're going to take a string and tie it, right? So it would be foolish to bother putting all your very labor-intensive embroidery up there. Okay, now down here in 1985, it's getting very elaborate. You see the progression of elaboration here. And again, but you still have your gules, your center one and your 4 in the corners. And then some very elaborate parrots up here. Okay. And this is a temple motif. All right. Okay. The veil, the ludi, is a very important identity marker among Rabaris. And the pattern of embroidery as well as the pattern of bandani communicate where she is in her life, okay, how old she is, whether she's married, whether she's a widow. All that is communicated through the ludi, and it's made out of wool because the Rabaris kept sheep and it was practical for them. They spun their own, they hand spun their own wool and gave it to weavers to weave, and then those weavers gave it to Khatris to dye. Then it was brought back to the Rabaris, and they took the 2 halves of it, stitched it together, and then decorated it with embroidery. And when I came to Kutch for the first time in 1970, this is the style, this is the layout or the pattern of embroidery. 2 medallions here. One would go over the head on the top, and one would be in the back, and then 4 medallions in the corners. And I think when I came, though, it was more interlaced patterns here, which we see down here in the bottom. Okay. And here's a close-up of that ludi, the medallion. Now, as time goes on, the women begin to change the color palette, whereas it was white and yellow. This is a bit faded, it's an old one. Now they're using, instead of the yellow, they're using a kind of tomato red, which is acrylic. This is acrylic yarn. So they're switching over. Once acrylic yarn became available, they they like that because it's easy to use and the colors are really fast. And they started making different, very fine, elaborated, but different patterns in the center of the medallion. And the main thing here, they're changing the materials. Okay, it's done on cotton rather than on the wool, and it's using acrylic thread. And the main thing is that they are doing it on a separate piece of fabric and applying that fabric onto the woolen ludi. Now that means that they can do finer work because it's a finer fabric. Also, it means that they can extend, they know the value of their work. It takes a lot of time to do this embroidery. So they can extend its utility by, if the ludi is old, they can remove that patch, that tiguri, and put it on another one, right? So they're thinking in terms of conserving their efforts. Okay. Towards the end of the 80s, I think, women started to get, they started to dislike wearing that wool. It's pretty heavy and scratchy. It's warm, but it also breathes, but it's really scratchy. Okay, so they started to instead wear a paño. And a paño is a green cloth that was originally used as a baby carrier. They would tie the baby into the paño and sling it over their back under their ludi. Okay, so they started using that as a veil. It's cotton, more comfortable. They would apply the medallions onto it in the same way, but instead of, well, they did have the four corners, but they also embroidered a whole border on either end and applied that. So again, these can be transferred to other fabrics. Now, a little into the 90s, Rabari men started going abroad to, it's always been difficult to be a herder. You just barely eke out a living, right? So they started going to Muscat to work as laborers, and they would send back wonderful synthetic fabrics. Some of them like this. This was a highly prized one, this printed one. And so women started wearing that as a veil and putting the same border on it. So they always see, here you see an adaptation. What is this telling us? That they're having an opportunity to bring materials from abroad. Okay, this is a big statement. However, they're still maintaining their identity, their Rabari identity, by keeping this embroidered border. Now, moving up to today, this is a ludi from 2013. The women still wear the woolen ludi, but only for ceremony, only for a very brief time for the fera, when they do the wedding, and a little bit after that. But they pretty much, they struggled, okay, with the community because it's an identity marker, and then, you know, the young women don't want to wear it anymore. So then they turned it into a ceremonial object. So it's just worn for a little while, but it's very elaborately embroidered. Okay, now the whole border is, big wide border is embroidered, and then very elaborate medallions. Again, you've still got your tomato red kind of acrylic along with the white predominating, and hardly any other colors actually. And the most interesting thing is that although this looks much more intricate and elaborate, it's actually faster to embroider because some of the work is done by machine. I'm going to get into that later. But at this time in the 2013, the interlacing came back in a big way. And so you see a lot of interlacing on this particular ludi. Okay. Not only, we've been talking about time, but not only according to time, according to space, according to region, the styles varied. And here we have 3 conchalis blouses from about the same era, but from 3 different subgroups. Remember, I told you there are 3 subgroups of rabaris in Kutch. So on the left is the Kachi rabari. In the center is the Debra rabari. I sort of made it schematic like the geography of Kutch. And on the right is the Eastern Kutch Wagodee Embroidery Kanchali. So I hope you can see that it all is rabari and yet it all is distinct. So these are all identity markers, right? The Debra rabari is probably the most elaborate embroidery, the very, very labor intensive. And the Wagodee embroidery is quite dense, and I'll show you more on that. The Wagodee embroidery clearly draws from regional styles. There are many different communities embroidering in Eastern Kutch, in Wagad, and there's a commonality among those different groups, but they are distinct. And some of the characteristics are the use of lemon yellow, which is a little bit, it's still yellow and white, but the yellow is a different yellow. And also very, very dense stitching. It's almost 3-dimensional stitching, and profuse use of mirrors. It's almost as if, you know, there are mirrors and then everything else just kind of support them. Oh, and I told you about the jarmar motif. This is a jarmar actually that she's wearing. So that's what that original motif on the Kanchali is referring to. Okay, more Wagodee work. I like Wagodee work a lot. Wagodee rabari. Other characteristics of the style is big, bold motifs and lots of detailing in finishing particularly. You see in that child's kurto, the sort of scalloped closing. That's it's just purely for decorative reasons. And then in the 2 batwas, you have here this, I don't know if you can see, this is cut out here, right? So there are mirrors and a little bit of fabric in the backing, and then held together with buttons. So lots of buttons and tassels and cowrie shells. Particularly in Wagad is the use of this wonderful marbled felting for a tassel. They take different colors of raw wool and felt it, so it has this marbled effect. And actually you see that in Central Asia. So one wonders if it's a very old technique that has been brought from times before rabaris were even in India. Okay, bakia is another technique that's used. It's a single, not an embroidery thread, okay? It's a sewing thread, one single sewing thread used in back stitching. And it's used to decorate blouses, but not just for fun. It has meaning, and it conveys the woman's marital status. So among the Debra rabaris, the red one here on the left, this motif right here is what tells you that the woman has a living husband, okay? If she's a widow, she won't have this. And among the Kachi rabaris, this is it's a little hard to see here, but this kind of, it's called Dowry. It's tooth-like, spike-like pattern that goes around the neck and the sleeves, and that indicates that a woman has a living husband. Now, this black blouse would be worn at a time of mourning. Now, a widow wears a black blouse, and she won't use this dowry. She'll just have a very simple bakia. And so when a woman is mourning for someone else, but she does have a living husband, she'll indicate that by the bakia and also by this colored embroidery right here. Okay, and bakia is also used for men's keria, this jacket that the Rabari men wear, and I showed you a close up here. It's very, very fine and elaborate. And here it's since the garment is white, it's done in multicolor. And some of the saying, here's a double pseudo parrot, and I'm not sure what this motif down here is. This is the scorpion, the Vici. And again, you've got this cutout and decoration. That's a Debra Rabari Kedio. Okay. Now, let's see, from the 60s, definitely in the 90s, I think not so much 60s, 80s, 90s, inflation made it very difficult to survive on the livelihood of milk and wool and animals. And so women had to start to work for wages, okay? And Rabaris are fortunate among many communities in Kutch in that they are not socially restricted. They can go out and earn. And I mean, traditionally when Rabaris are migrating, the men go ahead with the herds of sheep and goats, and the women bring up the rear with the camels and all of the household things, right? And then they set up the camp. So the women are very independent, and they could go out and earn. So they did start to do commercial embroidery, but fortunately they were also able to do work in houses, do construction work, and so on. And the commercial embroidery that they did, they resisted it for a while, actually. They equate it with wage labor. They call it the same, mazuri, okay? And usually they can earn more money doing almost anything else besides embroidery. The upshot, though, is whatever they did, they had to do something to earn money. And that meant that they had less time to work on their own embroidery. They make a very clear distinction between mazuri embroidery and their own embroidery, right? There's, people always ask, oh, how does it influence them? It doesn't influence them. They don't like it. But the only influence is that it impacts their time. And soon, ironically, what happened is that the demands, they're sort of like dueling needles, okay? So as time went on, women would do more and more work for their dowry. If you're doing, because there's a little healthy competition. You're doing this, okay, I'll do this plus this. Oh, okay, well, I'll do this plus this plus this. And so they started having bigger dowries, more and more embroidery, and less time to do it. So this is a big problem, right? And the Debria and the Kachi Rabaris had two different responses to this dilemma. Among the Debrias, it wasn't the women at all who decided it. The men, the men who make the rules for the community decreed in 1995, no more embroidery, no more wearing or using hand embroidery, with a fine. And it was a big enough fine to make sure that it was followed, okay? So the Debra women, they didn't want to be plain. Embroidery was joy, it was beauty. And to not be able to wear it meant that they would be sad, right? It's equated with when you're in mourning, you wear plain, right? So they had to they put their heads together. They came up with an idea of how they could decorate and still be within the rules. They came up with applying ribbons, rickrack trims with a sewing machine. So that was okay. And the Kachi Rabaris had a different response. They started using getting zigzag sewing machines and doing a combination of machine and handwork. So this is the Debria work, which isn't embroidered at all anymore. And this is the Kachi work. Would you know if I didn't tell you that it has machine embroidery? Probably not, because they did it so cleverly. You know, their open chain stitch is so dense that the zigzag, this is the zigzag here, it looks a lot like the open chain, but it takes a fraction of time. So they would do the outline. Remember I told you the basic outline, the base? They would do that in zigzag and then fill in the rest with hand embroidery. So it very cleverly, and I think in both cases, the work emulates their style. So it's an innovation that tells you what's going on in their lives, okay? It's still the tradition, it still identifies them, and yet it's telling you that today we don't have as much time to embroider, so we use some contemporary techniques, okay? So this I see as a wonderful, appropriate solution to a problem, a design solution, right? Okay, a little more on the Debria work, which we call Hari Jari, done with a sewing machine. And it started out just being, okay, let's see how we can decorate. But as time went on, it became an art form in and of itself. And the way one woman explained it, I love this. She said, you know the art when you know the craft, which means as you're doing it, you think, okay, well, I can do this, and I can do the same way that embroidery, as you saw, got more and more and more elaborate. So now this Hari Jari is becoming more and more elaborate. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about creativity because it's very important to Rabari embroidery. I told you that when the dowry is presented, it's judged according to its innovation, you know? She did something new. And that's how it always advanced. You know, they would discuss among themselves, oh, that's good. Look, she did that, that's new. And, you know, well, I like it, but I'm not going to copy it because then I would be not very creative. I'll do something else. I'll get an idea. I'll get, you know, an inspiration, but I won't copy. And, you know, solving the dilemma of time limit, right? Commercial embroidery did think about time because it's about money, right? So the way that commercial embroidery dealt with it was to make printed patterns. And this is an industrial idea, right? So that things are going to be more standard and they're going to be faster and cheaper. And they printed the pattern and had women fill it in. And that's one reason Rabari women didn't like commercial work. It's not creative. It's very restricting. So they found ways to deal with time that enabled them to still continue to be creative, right? And so what I like about this photograph is that it shows you how women understood how to work within a tradition and still have their individual interpretation. So I think you can see all of these ludis are Rabari, right? They're Kachi Rabari, actually. This woman over here is either old or widowed, okay? So she doesn't have the embroidery, but everyone else does. And it all looks similar, but each one is unique. And that is sort of the essence of it. How to stay within your tradition, but have your individual interpretation, okay? Now, thinking of all that, and also realizing that embroidery was grossly undervalued. That was one of the reasons that I started Kala Raksha, and that was one reason I started the design school, Kala Raksha Vidyalaya. I thought women's embroidery is looked at like labor, just the way that they look at it, like labor. But what if we look at it as art instead? And you know, at the same time, design as an entity was coming into India, and it was highly valued. So I thought if Rabaris can design their own work like they always did, then they can get more value for themselves as artists and for their work. And was the impetus for starting the Design School for Artisans in 2005. And so it did enable women embroiderers, Rabaris and others, and also men, weavers, printers, and bandani artists to revalue their work. And this is one example of one of our graduates, Sajinuben Pachan Rabari, a Debra Rabari woman. And some of the work that she's done, she did applique work for, and I didn't even talk about applique work today, but for one of her collections. And I love this embroidered jacket that she did with elephants playfully coming over the shoulder and over the cuff of the jacket. And she has a brand, Shangar, and that's her logo there. So this education has enabled women to take their embroidery in new directions and to get more value for it. And we also have a postgraduate course in Somaya Kalavidya in Business and Management for Artisans. We call it the BMA. And Sajinuben did that course, a very courageous woman. She's not literate, and yet she was able to think about it. She was able to do a business and management course. You know, kudos to her. Okay, so yeah, women are now being recognized for their creativity. This is Mongi Ben Rana, and I'm wearing a jacket embroidered by Mongi Ben also. And behind her, Lachu Ben Raja Rabari, both Kachi Rabaris. And this is a fashion show that we had in Mumbai in 2013 at Good Earth. And so women are being recognized for their creativity, for their individuality, and they're also getting better remuneration because it's their own work. They're not doing just commercial rote work, but they're doing their own designs. Okay, today, now this is 2019, this photograph. Life has become faster, and Rabaris have a lot more exposure, like everyone does, through traveling and through mobile phones and internet and TV. And fashion has really become the new tradition. And it wants to move fast. It wants to have bigger changes. Hand embroidery can't really keep up. In addition, women still do have to earn. Some women still embroider to earn, but honestly, very few do hand embroidery for themselves now. It's lost its cultural relevance. But decoration and expression of identity is still very important. So you see a lot more of the machine work, the machine application, than the handwork, a little bit of handwork. Women are still as creative as ever, probably even more so, but not so much with the hand embroidery. And so we have to accept that because it's their tradition. They decide, we don't impose that on them. And what I want to say is that I think that the contemporary style as it is continues to express how Rabaris maintain their identity, express their identity, and adapt to today's world. So this style is telling us who Rabaris are today, contemporary. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy ma'am. It was very, very educating and interesting. And let us have some questions. If everybody has any questions, please do go ahead and ask.
It's really a wonderful session. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And बहुत ही अच्छा. यहाँ एक सवाल दीप्ति पाटिल मैडम ने चैट बॉक्स में पूछा है. At the times, I have also seen use of small coach shells in these embroideries. Now these shells are usually found near sea, whereas this community is based in desert. So it is that they consider this as a luxury or something unique that they don't find in local regions.
Well, cowrie shells were traded, but they have these particular very small ones called kondi, I think, if I remember, and they have to be pierced in a particular place, and they were traded. But you don't forget that Kutch has a big sea coast. And in fact, Tundawand, where a lot of these photographs were taken, is right on the sea. You used, until they built a power plant there, you could walk to the sea. But I think those were traded, and there's always been trading. Look, where did they get the embroidery thread? They didn't make it. Right? They spun their own wool and had it locally woven. But where did they get the mirrors? Those were traded also. And there's always been trading.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, so much.
Sure.
Hello.
I request to all others, please mute yourself so that those who want to ask the questions, they can ask easily. Yeah, Varshali madam, please.
Yeah, ma'am, you're talking about that dowry bag, or what are the sizes, and can it be carried on single shoulder or double shoulder? How is it carried like?
Oh, it's not got a strap. It's got, remember I said that it's not embroidered at the top? It's like gathered, and then a string is tied around it, and it's carried like a sack.
Okay.
Traditionally. Now they do sometimes make, they don't know. When I used to, sometimes we would go somewhere and the Rabari women would be so embarrassed to use a shoulder bag that they would cover it with the ludi because it's not their usual way of carrying things.
Ludi is
or
same
they
like
keep it on their head, of course, right?
Yeah. And this ludi we are talking about, is it like a dupatta or stole?
It's a veil, so it goes over the head. You have to cover your head, right? And I think you might have seen in the one I showed with all the different ones, the one goes on the top and one goes on the back, the medallions. It's huge. It's very big.
Okay.
And it
Thank
is
you so
very
much.
scratchy. I saw somebody asked a question about teaching embroidery. No, at our school, we teach design. We don't teach skills. We in fact, the school is only open to working traditional artisans of Kutch. So they have to have their tradition down, which is, as I mentioned, it's not just skill, it's technique plus concept. And we're trying to value that concept to bring that out. However, to non-artisans, we have courses in craft traditions. Right? You don't teach a weaver to weave or an embroiderer to embroider. That's silly, right?
Now one more question by Tanmaya Khadeji. Hi ma'am, myself Avanti, sorry. And I want to ask that at the starting you mentioned the 3 parts of Rabari community. Could you please repeat it?
Yeah, this is only in Kutch. There are many. If you read my book, Threads of Identity, I cover, I can't remember anymore, I think 12 different groups in Gujarat and Rajasthan. But in Kutch, we have Kachi in the west part of Kutch, Dhebria in central Kutch, and Wagodee in eastern Kutch, which is known as Wagodee.
Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Thank you.
Gabriel,
Thanks.
not embroidering it.
Vikram, do you want to ask? Yes, Vikram, yeah, please.
Hello. Am I audible?
So we can hear you. Yeah, Vikram, yes.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Hello. Sir, I want to
Hi.
know further whether there are any other communities in this particular. Hello.
If there are what?
Other communities who
Hello.
pursue Bharat.
Oh yes, I showed you several, but there's many embroideries, and I don't ascribe to this 14 stitches and this kind of thing. There are many embroidery styles, and there are subtleties. Each community, each ethnic group or caste has an embroidery style. There's some, and I'll tell you another thing. This is interesting. Two basic types of style. One is a regional style. So you have Paco embroidery. Paco is not a community, right? It's a style, but it's practiced by Soda Rajputs, by Megwals, by Sutars, and each one will have their subtle difference, okay? But predominating is the regional aspect. There's always a regional aspect and an ethnic aspect. Then you have the ethnic styles. That tells you that those communities are more apart from the other communities in the region. So you have Rabari style, Ahir style, Mutwa style. These are all very distinct communities where their ethnic aspect predominates over the regional aspect, but there's always an overlap of that. Was that the same question? Are there any, it popped up a question, are there any communities like Rabaris? I didn't quite understand it. Do you mean other?
Yes, Vikram sir, there are a lot of different communities like the Ahirs and the Rabaris. Rabaris have 3 different parganas, so they have 3 different forms of Rabari Bharat. Then you have the Mutwa community, then you have the Mochi community, and a lot of different communities that are there who follow Bharat. Bharat is, you can understand it a little bit if I may, ma'am. I'm sorry, I just took over the question. It's to fill embroidery, मतलब वो भरत को it is to fill, तो वो embroidery का एक umbrella term है, and Bharat is practiced by several communities, and they are all
many, yeah.
And then it is all different aspects in that, very different variations.
Yeah, and they all convey the the identity of the maker and the user. And embroidery is women's work is different from men's work because the maker and the user are the same. But for men's crafts like weaving and printing and bandhani, the maker is usually making for someone else because it's a livelihood. It was a commercial endeavor, right? So the embroidery is very closely connected to the identity of the maker.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. May I ask one question, please?
Sure.
Yeah. I want to know something about the Kala Raksha Sangrahalaya, Kala Raksha Museum, about which Hanoji mentioned. I am very much interested in the museums. I am a student of museums and museology. So if you can please elaborate about that, I will be happy for it.
Yeah. See, I come from a museum background. I did my second master's degree in museology, and I was a curator at the Textile Museum in Washington. And so when I came to Kutch, I was actually still employed at the museum in 1990. I was collecting for the Textile Museum as well as for the Henry Art Gallery, and where I had worked previously. But for my research, I also collected because there's nothing like an object. You get your data, but then you want to turn it over and look on the back, and a photograph won't do. So you need the objects, right? So I made a collection, and it's now at the International Folk Art Museum here in Santa Fe. So when I started Kala Raksha, I wanted to have an alternative to commercial embroidery because I was disturbed that it didn't have anything to do with the tradition. So I understood that a tradition evolves because people see work and innovate. If that work gets sold off, they can't do it anymore. So that's their heritage and they need to have it. So although I was collecting for these museums in the United States, I also collected for use in India. And when we started Kalaraksha, I thought we need a museum where people can refer to their work because they forget. As you know, I showed you how as time goes on, it evolves. But you need to go back and remember. You don't need to be that. You don't need to be your grandparents, right? But you need to remember who you are. And you need to get information from them. So that's how I started. And having a museum background, I started collecting and documenting. And we got a database that's a digital database. So everything is all well documented. And another thing, you know, that's the last thing in my book, that an object is only an object until you document it. Then it becomes an artifact. So the documentation is an equally important part of it, right? So always document.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks a
Online
lot.
too.
And,
You can there's a website, you can access the Kalaraksha Museum online. You can search the collection.
yeah. The name itself shows what's the motto or what the mission of this museum, Kala Raksha, the protection of our this heritage or this documentation, preserving of our this arts. So it's an wonderful. I'm very happy because being working as a 8.5 years as a curator of the museum, again international museum here, and now working as the director for archives and museum department in Hyderabad. I'm very happy that you are with us and such a wonderful guidance to us. So thanks a lot again. And I request to other participants also, if you have any questions, then please ask because the time is too much because we are here in the morning session, but there is a night. So we are humbly very, very sorry for it all.
No problem. Any more questions? Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Yeah. Ma'am, how this embroidery differs than other embroidery? How to make out this is a robbery embroidery?
Yeah. You know, it's experience. You know, you can yeah.
Are there certain motif they
just have
use?
to look at many pieces and see the pattern. And you know, like when we were doing the design course the first time, we asked women to, part of that course is to look at your tradition and understand what its salient points are, you know, and sometimes you're so close to it you don't know. So I would like tease them. I would show an I hear piece and say, well, this is Rabari, isn't it? They go, no. And then you say, well, why not? And then they start to tell you, right?
Okay. Thank you so
But
much.
yeah, you just need to keep looking, I guess. I mean, I tried to give you some points, but it's not like mathematics, really, right? It's art.
Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful session, ma'am.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. And with the same motto, we also started this Kala Academy in Mumbai by our foundation only, and our Archaeological Survey of India's former Joint Director General, Dr. S.B. Yota, and our some other superintendents of archaeology department and some eminent persons of the same field. They are also working for this Kala Academy, which is just now started there in Panvel region in Mumbai. So with the help of all of you, we will proceed for to encourage the new generations to work in this field and to save this our real heritage for humanity purpose.
Absolutely.
Yes,
It's invaluable. You know, it's documents. It tells you so much that can't be told in words. So it needs to be valued. Any more questions?
Yeah. No more questions?
No, yes. Now we, yes.
Ma'am, just
Thank
one
you.
last,
Thanks a lot again. Yes.
just one
Yeah.
last question from me, ma'am. How much of Gujarati do you still remember?
Gujarati avade che. I only just
Arey.
left in April, no? I'm still very much in touch with our graduates. I'm doing lots of projects with them. They call me up, I call them up.
Yes, sir.
Huh?
Saru, Saru. I was just wondering about that same thing. How much of Gujarati can you speak? Because Dr. Matthew Salpute is still learning Gujarati. And every time when he comes to India, I usually come and go along with him because he has still
See,
difficulties with
I
it.
started learning Gujarati in 1970. I did Marathi, actually. I
great.
got a master's in Marathi in 1981. But from Marathi to Gujarati and I studied some Hindi. So I never actually studied Gujarati. I studied Marathi, I studied Hindi. Gujarati, I don't write. See, I only talk and listen.
Yes.
But
So
I'm more familiar with it now because I used it for 30 years, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Our Kalaraksha, and Somaya Kalavidya, we always operate in Gujarati. And our courses, our design courses are not in English. You see, there are plenty of design courses in English, but who could go? The Karigars couldn't go.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we made it so that they could go. It's taught in Gujarati and Hindi. All of our teachers are not Gujarati speaking. Some are Hindi speaking, but not taught in English.
Our
We
one
have in
scholar
this class.
Kashmiraji asked, तुम्ही अजून पण मराठी बोलता का?
मराठी येता पण विसरून गेले.
पण ठीक आहे, तुम्ही हे बोलता हेच मराठीत आहे. So
It was too cute.
Yeah, very, very nice. Thank you so much. असंच गुजराती आणि मराठी दोन्ही बोलत जा.
I love to hear Marathi because, when I first was in India, I was in Pune. And so Marathi is like very old for me.
मराठी म्हणजे पुणे.
Very nice.
So
to hear
thank you.
that.
जी.
We are so excited to know this.
Yes.
Well, thank you for having me. Like I said, it was a great opportunity because
Thank you, ma'am. It was our pleasure, ma'am.
And your the information and the study that you have done in this field is amazing. I am so very impressed. I mean, even I being an Indian and knowing so much of embroidery and this, I am not still aware of this kind of art.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
And I would really love to this now. That is why my question was, do they teach the Bharat? So I would love to learn it. And now that
contact Somaya Kalavidya. Sometimes we do a 3-week course. But I feel really lucky. I feel very lucky to have been in India when I was, because so much has changed.
I request to other all, please mute yourself.
Yeah.
It's echoing.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Now you please.
There is still so much to be done, and still we feel we have just touched the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Not only this, it is that these are traditional arts which need to survive. They need to thrive. Actually, why not?
Well, I mean, if the women don't want to do it anymore, then you can't force it on them. Then it's not it doesn't have meaning, right? I think making them work, slaving away at something they don't want to do is not very good. So we appreciate what there is and what there was.
I meant is the demand. There should be a demand. There should be a demand for folk art and these traditional arts, which should not die at any cost. That is only my. So then there will be, if there is a demand, there will be a supply.
But very few people understand this need, no?
I have a little clip. We did an evaluation of our 15 years of design education, and there's just a teeny little clip in it of this very formidable Debra Rabari woman. And the interviewer is asking her, what do we have to do to get this embroidery or this tradition to survive? And she said, women are ready to embroider, but they got to get a good price. And that's, of course, it's, it's kind of a no-brainer. But they don't get a good price. What really, and another thing, I mean, I have so many stories, but I remember I was buying an old piece from a Rabari woman, like one of those pieces in the photographs. And I, just because it's de rigueur, I bargained. And she said to me, you know very well that if we made this today, it would cost 5 times more. And I said, okay, okay.
I thought that your motto of this establishing of Kala Raksha Museum is also one way to present this art in front of the world, and we can directly approach with the customers of these communities. And because of this your work, I just remembered one definition by Mahatma Gandhi about the museums. He mentioned in his Panchayat Raj book, the museums as the exhibition places where we can exhibit the best things which was produced or made by these our villagers. And if we can connect these communities directly with the entire world, it will be better. So Gandhi mentioned in his definition about these exhibitions at the museum, and I thought that you are doing it so well.
Yeah. It's true. You take it out of context and somehow it has more value sometimes.
Yes, ma'am. It's like the clash of civilization. We want what West has and West wants what we have. So it's like that. We undervalue our own skillful arts, and then we want to look westward, and westward want to see towards the east.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Ghar ki murgi dal barabar.
Exactly, ma'am. Exactly.
But
Very
still,
well
that
said.
India is doing it great, actually, because I live in Malaysia now, working for a production for Indigenous group here in Malaysia. So they are really sidelined, actually. Here, the Indigenous group is sidelined by the government. So it's not coming out. So we are working with them now. So I can really connect to these sessions and all very, very well, actually. But India is really doing great.
I want to thank you for having this course. I think this is a great initiative.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
We are thankful to you also, and Hainoji also, so that he introduced to you with all of us, and we are really thankful. And if possible in future also, we want your guidance,
Sure.
and we will want to learn too much from you. So
Yeah,
thank
I'm
you.
happy for you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I actually, after doing that book, I did so much more research, and I had planned to do another book on all the embroideries of Kutch, but I never published it. It's still in manuscript form. It needs to be published.
If you want to publish anything, we are always ready. So through the Hainoji, you just send us whatever you have and what you want to publish. We accept. Just now I hear say to that we publish it all. Whatever be that, we know that it's a really scholarly work and which is genuine and which will guide for our future generations. So we are always ready. Please say to us anytime.
Maybe that's a kind of lockdown project, but all my manuscript is still in India. When I left India in April, I just bolted out. All my stuff is still there. 30 years of stuff. So I have to go back and get it.
So now the time is to convert that manuscripts in typing and that all things, so that we will proceed and we'll publish it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of drawings and photographs too. It's a project for, when we're sitting in lockdown.
आम्हाला वाचायला आवडेल.
Yes, yes,
So
getting
Hanuji,
eagerly.
yes. Now we conclude because there is too much time, too much night there for
Yeah.
ma'am, and yes, please. Yeah.
Almost
thank
midnight. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
And,
Thank you.
we'll
Our
be in
pleasure.
Thank you,
touch.
ma'am. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a
Thank you,
lot, and
sir.
we'll meet again. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Good night. Good night. Good night,
Aujo.
ma'am.
Good
Yeah.
night.
Aujo.
Aujo. Aujo, ma'am.
Shubharatri, ma'am.
Shubharatri. Shubharatri.
Ah.
Ji.
Oops, how do I get out?
Ma'am, just
How do I get out?
click on